Hello, my name is Brady Buckner, and I am the president of the Financial Services Innovation Coalition. And I'll be moderating this episode of the podcast, and it is titled The Impact of Current Immigration Policies on Child Labor. When we hear of child labor violations, we often think of foreign countries, but the truth is that in America, many of our favorite brands have been found to hire a record number of children as young as 12, and in some cases, even younger, to perform jobs across all industries that are dangerous to even the most capable adults. With increased labor demand, systems meant to protect children are slowly breaking down across the country. The number of unaccompanied minors entering the U.S. climbed to a high of 130,000 last year, three times what it was 5 years earlier. For some, their parents may not have been allowed to enter the country alongside them due to restrictive policies like Title 42, forcing parents to make an impossible choice: send their kids to the U.S. alone, keep them in dangerous situations at home. And to clarify, these are not children who have entered the U.S. undetected. In many cases, the government is aware that they are here and are responsible for placing them with qualified sponsors. Caseworkers are meant to maintain contact with placed migrant children, but it's been reported that the agency has lost sight of about one-third of them, and an estimated two-thirds of them, of the unaccounted children, are assumed to be working full-time. Despite bipartisan consensus and benefits of immigration to spark economic growth and ease the current labor shortages, Congress has been unable to pass sensible immigration reform laws for the past 2 decades. Without a path to legal status, many are doomed to a lifetime of financial disadvantage and vulnerability to exploitation, particularly by employers. So, today I'd like to introduce our two panelists or two speakers. First, we have the FSIC's co-founder and CEO, Kimble. Mr. Kimble is a 25-year veteran of Capitol Hill who's held positions as chief of staff for senior members of Congress and has been the chief lobbyist for one of the nation's largest financial services firms. In his current role, he aims to create connections between government, nonprofits, and corporations to facilitate organization, funding, and integration of programs dedicated to financial wellness and accessibility. We are also joined by Workplace Fairness's Executive Director, Edgar Ndjatou. In his role, he shares his expertise in directing all aspects of programming, website strategies, and media for the national organization, educating both workers and their advocates while promoting worker-friendly public policy. Edgar practiced employment law for 9 years, co-managing his own law firm. As an employment lawyer, he represented employees in the federal, nonprofit, and private sectors in all phases of administrative proceedings and lawsuits involving claims under federal, state, and local employment laws. Edgar is the founding principal of FSIC LLC, where he provides consulting services for individuals and organizations, human resources, business development, management, and more. So let's get started. We've worked up some questions today to mainly talk about, we've seen a lot of stories in the news about child labor laws, and I can't remember in my lifetime that this was ever such a problem, but yet something's breaking down because we're seeing a lot more. So, Edgar, what current events have brought child labor laws and immigration policies to the forefront of the labor rights movement recently?
Yeah, thanks, Brady. And it's good to be on the podcast today. And so, recently, the New York Times did a major investigation on the use of child labor, particularly migrants from south of the border. So, many very Central American countries who are working in various jobs, and not what you might typically think that a teenager might be working in, like at a Starbucks or in retail, but in heavy factory jobs. Jobs where they're on production lines or working with heavy machinery, working in some cases double shifts or overnight shifts, and working for a little pay. And so this exploitation is so embedded in our current economy and supply chain, that it's hard for many big companies to say that they have not been impacted by this in some way. So maybe it's not the company itself that the brand name of that's involved, but one of the suppliers might be involved. And it's tragic because many of these migrant workers are again minors, underage. They're here not with necessarily working papers, and so they're being taken advantage of. And in many instances, although they're all enrolled in school, they're not going to school because they're either too tired from a shift at their job, or just desperately need the money to send home to their family or to make ends meet while they're here in the United States. And so it's created a firestorm where now the federal government is looking to step up enforcement in this area. And also people are looking to see if there are other things that we can do to help these migrant minor workers.
Okay, so my follow-up question to that is, and I think you partially answered it, but why are we having more minors show up at the border, and why are they being hired?
Yeah, so immigration has been a fraught issue in our country for decades now, and migration from south of the border is something that we've I'm sure now in our collective lifetime has been always a topic of political conversation. And what you're having now is that with COVID and with the US's recent stances on immigration, it's been harder for adults who are traveling south of the border to get into the country. However, under U.S. immigration policy, the U.S. government has to accept minors who come unaccompanied at the border. They cannot send them. They cannot, make them stay in Mexico. They can't send them back. They have to accept them. And part of that is also ensuring that if an unaccompanied minor comes to the border looking, to get in the country, either through asylum or other means, that they're paired with either a very close relative, family friend, or put into essentially the foster care system, the federal foster care system, to be, placed in this country. And so that's why you have a lot of parents now in many Central America and other countries where people are coming south of the border, sending their children, to the United States, to, hopefully get a better life and to send money back to the family.
Okay. All right, Edgar, thank you so much for that. Kevin, let's shift over to you and let's talk more about some of the political aspects of this discussion. There's farmers that definitely need cheaper immigrant, labor, and Republicans, they're mostly Republicans. A lot of times, the people that own these large farms, they demonize immigrants. So they need the immigrants for labor, but yet they demonize them in the press and want them to be, deported and not be allowed in the country. So why isn't this part of the conversation from a political front?
Brady, thanks, and thanks for having me on. I love the podcast. As politically, it's one of those things where those of us on the more progressive side of things don't hold people accountable. We're very worried about making life harder for the immigrants, so we play a different game. We should be very aggressively forcing them to not have illegal immigrants, right? We need to be very aggressive in forcing the issue. Like we need to force them to actually pass laws. So until we pass immigration policy, we should have no immigrant workers. Like we should get rid of that standard, because employers will always take advantage of this kind of bifurcated thing. Like they're not legal, so we got illegals. They don't complain. They, if it weren't for the New York Times doing this research, we never would have known that there were all these child labor laws being broken. So we have allowed this situation to kind of, the idea that American employers, American business people are so ethical or beyond reproach is something that always strikes me as unrealistic, and just plain out false, right? Look at how hard Starbucks fights to keep the people from unionizing, or look at what the railroads have done. American businesses will wreak havoc on people. They won't raise wages. So this project, your question about, why do we have this kind of emergence of disparate political ideals coming together to make a really weird, really bad policy? And all I can say is that a lot of people, one, it's some inherent racism. Their racism is being used against them. So they're being, they're standing up against illegal immigrants, even though they're the ones who hire them. But I hate to say that they're hypocritical. I think they're just, they've lost sight of it. They've lost sight of the conversation, or lost sight of what side of their interests are on. I don't even think, because I've talked to farmers, they're like, yeah, we can't find workers. I was like, well, half your workers are across the border being stuck. And their mindset, they can't even get their minds around that. That's the reason they can't find workers. So it's
interesting. So, regarding the immigration laws, is there any progress, or where do we currently stand that allows these abuses to happen, especially children?
Again, it's a weird place we're in now. And Edgar will probably be able to know more about this because he's done immigration law, or he's been immigration or work and employment law for a very long time. That we got to this place by, we as a country decided, 70 years ago that child labor is something that we did not want to encourage. We wanted kids to grow and go to get education, become a better workforce. How we've come full circle, we've come full circle on a lot of issues in American politics, from abortion to workforce to racial equity. So I'm not surprised we got here, but the policies are not being put forward at all in a way that is helpful. We're not doing anything on immigration. Last time when I worked on the Hill, 2006, we did an immigration bill, and the congressman I worked for had an amendment on the floor that would have put increased criminal penalties against employers who hired illegal immigrants. Every Republican voted against that, right? Hell, half the Democrats voted against it, but every Republican voted against increasing penalties, although they said they don't want workers. And I will give you guys, this is a true story. During that time, we worked on the Hill, the National Republican Club was being refurbished. So they had a contractor working. The whole crew was Hispanic. And so we wondered, are these guys illegal or not? So we went over and we asked them, because I worked for a Hispanic member, and it turned out the whole crew is illegal. So while the Republicans were fighting a battle to get rid of immigrants, they were using illegals. So there is a huge amount of hypocrisy and lack of good faith on the part of these. I'm going to call it Republicans. I think we're often too genteel in our conversation. The Republicans are acting in bad faith when it comes to this policy.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Edgar.
If I can add, I think, Kevin hit on the head here, and right now it's no secret that there is employers are hurting for workers, right? And in many different industries, they're struggling to get qualified people to work, whether it's in agriculture on the field, whether it's in manufacturing or in warehouse positions. And so it's creating this sort of false narrative around how dangerous immigration is to the country. At the same time, you have many of these employers that will stop at nothing, to hire people, migrants without papers, whether they're adults or minors, and something has to give, right? Because immigration has been such an important part of our economy and our history, both from an economic perspective and social perspective, and what's happening now to many migrant workers is just uncalled for, particularly when you're talking about children.
Yeah, and I will say this comes to it's a little bit different part of the problem, but it is the other thing. Reason why immigrant employment is such a big deal is that employers don't want to pay. I mean, the CEO of the cereal manufacturer can't make $10 million a year if they're paying everyone $21 an hour. So they'd rather hire illegals, or people, and employers don't want to pay to train people, which is another reason why we have a huge shortage of workers. Because if you aren't willing to borrow $100,000 to go to college for a job, or pay, like airline pilots, there's a shortage of airline pilots. Well, it costs $100,000 to become a pilot, even though you don't need a college degree. Well, airlines don't pay for that training. So either you borrow the money to do it, or we have now is a 300,000 person pilot shortage in America.
Wow. Well, my take a little bit is Americans haven't been more responsive because they want the cheap strawberries, they want the cheap produce. And so they don't really look at if we paid the workers the minimum wage in this country, or even some lower wage, that their strawberries and their lettuce and everything would be a lot more expensive. So they're complicit as well, meaning all of us are complicit as well. So,
Well,
but
I will say
Keegan,
this though.
go ahead, go ahead.
I'll say something that it's not so much that the strawberries have to stay low, it's that the employers don't have to make as much. I mean, so there's a pile of money, or there's a pot of money, and you make a decision. If I can pay the workers 2 cents a strawberry, then I can have a big beach house. You know, there's no reason for some of the CEOs or owners to make as much money as they make. That is and we've allowed them to make their wage or make their high salaries on the back of illegal immigrants and child labor.
Kevin, that is a future episode on capitalism versus socialism. So, yeah, but it is an excellent point. And I would like you both to maybe comment on this, but I'll start with Kevin. You know, and I hate to come back to this, but the Republicans, they vote against enforcement against employers. Mm-hmm. In fact, Arkansas just passed a law to remove the responsibility of employers to check and report the ages of workers. So, you know, again, why aren't people more vocal about this? You know, particularly the progressives that are trying to fight to defend these folks, you know, these children and these people that are having to work illegally.
I think part of it, and Edgar may have a better perspective than I. It seems to me that the people who are supporting the child are trying not to hurt the immigrants at the same time they're trying, because in order for you to really do something about this, you have to go very aggressively against the employers, and therefore going very aggressively against people who are hired. So you don't want to hurt their livelihoods, right? And so I think that's where they have everyone boxed into a corner where you're like, because there's no reason why the Department of Labor shouldn't just go into Arkansas and shut down every plant, right? I mean, if they're not checking to see if they're having child labor, then they should, the FBI and everybody should be in there checking to see what they're doing. But that causes havoc. Sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I mean, that is sort of the conundrum with our current immigration policy, is that, particularly for people who are pro-immigration, you know, there's always that, it's always the goal of not hurting the migrant worker, right, or hurting the person that's here, whether they have papers or not, right? And every time there's a raid, you know, on a facility, you know, because there wasn't I-9 verification, or someone reported that, hey, I think there are people without papers working here, you know, the employer gets a fine, sure, right? But that fine is something most employers, particularly at that level, can afford if they're getting their facility raided. You know, but the workers themselves, they're the ones who, you know, get picked up by DHS and put in prison, or have to go, you know, through many hoops to, you know, try to stay in this country. You know, they're the ones that get impacted the most, right? And so I think the issue is that, you know, and this is not anything new, I think, for us to hear, or people who are listening, that we just need comprehensive immigration reform. You know, that's that really is what we need, because, you know, whether people who are anti-immigration like it or not, immigration is so important in many different industries, you know, in our nation. If you want to just talk dollars and cents, right, which most Americans understand, you know, many industries rely heavily on immigration and migrant workers at every level, whether it's at the top level or the person working out in the field or working minimum wage work. So we just need to address immigration whole scale, and make it more fair, humane, and equitable for everybody. And that includes Americans too, right? Americans deserve to work just as much as the person who's coming here to work from a different country. So that's what we need to really do. But because of our fraud politics, it's really a challenge.
Yeah, I think that's that. At the end of the day, we have no leverage in this fight, because no one's feeling the pain except for the work. I mean, if you're the farmer, you may want, you need more workers, but it's not bad enough for you to get your Republican congressman to vote for immigration reform, right? So because there is no real advocate, nationwide, there's not enough advocates or enough leverage points to get a whole bunch of these people to vote for immigration.
It's my understanding, and this may be a little bit out of date, but the big farms have hired people to hire people to work. So then if there isn't an issue with a bunch of illegal workers, the person that gets blamed is the person that hired the people, and they can easily disappear. They're not, real companies. So, but the thing I'd like to switch to, and this is really we should be talking about it more. And Edgar, I'm going to start with you. Is
Yep.
What is the impact on the lives of children that are forced to enter the labor force too early? They're mentally and physically probably not prepared. And how are they forced to work illegally? Like, how does that happen rather than going, no, I'm not going to do it? So can you go on both of those a little bit?
Yeah, so I want to just make one thing clear. The federal and most state laws allow minors to work. For in most places and under federal law, once you turn 14, you can't have a part-time job, right? My first job was a paper route, and I eventually got into work for a supermarket. I worked part-time. It was something I did, after school, on weekends, or during the summer, right? So I want to dispel that the notion that minors can't work, period. Minors can work, and many minors are your camp counselors and the ones who pack your groceries, right? But the key thing is that they're working part-time, or when school is not in session, right? And more importantly, not working certain industries, right? Because of the inherent danger of the minors. So you're not going to see many minors working in factory jobs or in construction sites or what have you, right? What's happening now with migrant workers is that they're the ones that are working in factory jobs, in agriculture, in warehouses, particularly where you're talking about slaughtering, poultry or meat. Very, very, working heavy machinery, very inherently dangerous work environments, right? And not always with the right training or protection to work these jobs, right? And so in the reporting that we've seen, we have heard of migrant children dying on the job, right? Which is, terrible. And why do we have this? So, I talked about how we're getting more minors who are coming to the southern border, and because of our U.S. law, immigration laws, that have to be accepted by the U.S. government. They can't be turned away. Part of the issue is that you have parents who are sending their kids because they're desperate, right? And so they'll send their children, to migrate to the border, and hopefully will be accepted by a close family member, by maybe a close family friend from wherever city or village they came from, or they're put into the foster system. But a lot of times, those family members or friends are not in a financial position to sponsor that minor, right? And sometimes they don't even know the minor is even coming to the border. And so you have situations where that adult says, look, I'll take you in because the government's telling me I have to, but you're going to have to find work. I can't have you under my roof and you not working and just going to school. So that's one thing, and in some instances, families are tricked, right? They go on social media and someone promises them that, if you make it to the border, we'll sponsor you, pay all your documents, and, get into school. What happens is that, child makes it to the border, they get taken in by this person that reached out from social media, and then that person takes advantage and says, well, now you owe me all this money. You owe me all the money that, you have to pay my rent, you have to pay part of the rent, you have to pay the fees I'm paying to the government to process your papers. And so basically it's peonage that's happening, right, to a lot of these minors.
Okay.
And so you have a lot of minors that have to work off this, debt that someone has put on them unfairly. So those like the main reasons why you're finding all these minors now working in these conditions.
Well, I, for one, am glad that this is becoming news on the front page. and that it won't just be today's story and disappear. Because as I said at the beginning, I just can't imagine, like I know that there's been abuses here and there, but this seems like a wide scale problem that is now being, you know, that's shining the light on it. So I guess as we close here, um, I want to ask you guys a couple more questions. One of them is, and I'll just ask this and have you both answer. And you probably already answered some of it, but why aren't employers required to verify and report to the U.S. government the social security number and age of workers? And this applies to both children and other migrant workers. So, Edgar, let's start with you.
I mean, that's a good question, Brady. And I think
you don't have a magic answer. Come on.
Unfortunately, I don't. I think that what has happened is forcing us to rethink enforcement when it comes to child labor. And the thing is, it in most instances, right, we're talking about non-American minors, right? So it's not you're not really talking about American children or children who have born here or who've lived here that are being taken advantage of. It's migrants, right? And migrants, unfortunately, tend to be a lot more disadvantaged because they're not familiar with our laws, or they're in these terrible economic situations that force them to be put in these circumstances where they have to work in certain jobs. So what I hope will happen is that this is a wake-up call to everyone that cares about workers' rights and also the rights of children, to demand certain protections. And here's the thing: you mentioned earlier that briefly that farmers will sometimes hire basically, a middleman or a middle person,
right,
or company to hire, or an agent to hire the workers so they can claim plausible deniability. But that's happening across the board. It's not just in agriculture. I mean, even in manufacturing or factory work, or retail, you're seeing the same thing. And when you read the New York Times article, I mean, a lot of the companies say, well, we didn't know that the staffing company was engaged in this behavior, right? And so, if you really want to affect change, you have to make it everyone's problem.
Yeah.
And you have to demand that the companies that are relying on this labor to keep up with their profits are doing the due diligence around who are they sourcing their workers from, right? Because this plausible deniability thing gets old, particularly when you're impacting a generation of minors.
Especially when you can see the person's 11 or 12. It's not hard to tell someone's 12 years old. That's
right. Right. Yeah, no kidding. So I want to comment real quick. Recently, I ran into a situation where there was a disclaimer that in order to get a grant, this organization had to sign a form saying that they would use the U.S. government's e-verify system, which is existing now and is functional, that basically every person hired under this grant and every person that they hired had to verify the employees and report to the e-verify system the result. And then if there was a problem, they couldn't hire that person. So why aren't, even if you could say, why aren't all employers required to use that system and report, the age and social security number of workers? Question that Edgar just answered.
Well, and I'll throw it back to Edgar, but I will say that I assume that the E-Verify is an employee cap. So only if you have so many employees, like if you're a very small business, you probably don't have to go through that process.
Yeah.
And then using the middlemen, they probably do. If you're a big corporation, the middlemen probably figure out a way to scam the E-Verify system. I'm assuming that's the case. But Edgar, you're probably in a better position to answer than me.
Yeah, it's looking the other way when you get certain documentation from someone where it's clearly either forged or not real, or just not using E-Verify, period. I think many employers now, when you mention E-Verify, don't know what you're talking about. They'll look at you like, what are you talking about? Or actively don't use it, right? Because they don't want to know if they're employing someone that is not working here with proper documentation. And look, I think for me, as from a workers' rights perspective, right? And because we're talking about, we don't want to hurt the migrant worker, right? And so, like for me, I personally don't have a big issue with it, right? Particularly if you're trying to not do harm to migrant workers. But ultimately, the problem is that when there's a raid or if a migrant worker gets in trouble independently, they get found out or what have you, it's not the employer coming in to like save them, right? Or sometimes if an employee gets tipped off that they might get raided, they fire all the staff.
Everybody. You fire them
Fire
all.
everybody, and so I will good luck, right? So so employers don't really feel, the weight of this at all, right? The law, even though it's meant to penalize, to hold employees more accountable, it's really not. It's really impacting the migrant worker at the end of the day, right?
Can I ask you a question? I mean, this is just, have you looked at like going after the insurance policies of the companies that have illegal immigrant workers or child labor to see, because it seems like that would be, if we go after their insurers to keep them from insuring them, that would put them out of business. I mean, or slow down their business or force them to make changes.
I mean, that's an interesting point, right? Because if you think about it, right, like if you have workers' comp insurance, right, and someone gets hurt on your premises while working for you, right, technically your workers' comp insurance should cover that person. Now, I'm not familiar with workers' comp or workers' comp policies to know, for example, like if the insurance company finds out that worker is not technically supposed to be working here, if that impacts the claim, if it gets denied, and then you're out of pocket. But maybe that's something to look at, right? That
even their building, like their fire insurance, because if you got people who aren't skilled, you got 12-year-olds working the plant, that should change the whole dynamic about.
I mean, if they're minors, I can't imagine that they'll be covered, right? Just because that I would imagine it violates the insurance claim, right? I would think, but it does raise an interesting question, because you have these deaths, right, that have happened, and probably it's going to continue to happen until we really fix this. I'm not hearing that employers doing anything, right? If anything, I'm sure that's trying to CYA it, right?
Right.
Totally. To not make this come back on us, So look, I do think when we're talking about a holistic approach, that's what we're really talking about here, that that we just need comprehensive immigration reform, and we will also need a comprehensive way to ensure that labor violations like this, which are unconscionable, right, and easy to avoid, are everyone's problem. If everyone has to deal with it, then hopefully that leads to less violations.
Okay. So I'm going to ask one more question, but at the beginning of it, if each of you could give just a little blurb on the organization you represent and why you're part of this fight. And then the question is going to be, what's the number one thing policy-wise that can really help this, turn these issues around? And Kevin, you go first.
So thanks, Brady. So Financial Services Innovation Coalition, or FSIC, we are an economic empowerment platform. We run around the country dealing with all issues related to economic inclusion of underserved populations. So this issue is one of those. It ties into a bunch of issues we care about, from the state of the workforce to fairness in wages to fairness in equity and training, and the way corporate America runs its operations, the lack of accountability being held by corporations. Because this is just one example of a whole bunch of places where corporate America is falling down or being, acting irresponsibly. And so I think, and to answer your question, what could be the one deal is employer sanctions, heavy employer sanctions. Like, the all the people in the newspaper who got caught, it should be, a mandatory minimum of five months in jail if you get caught hot with an illegal or underage person in your employ. I mean, those kinds of things are the only ways you're ever gonna, include, and it's a strict liability, meaning it doesn't matter if you used a third party employee person. If they're working in your plant, you are guilty of that. And I think that's the only way you're ever going to really eliminate illegal immigration.
So on that, when I was a younger man and everything was more, there were no shades of gray and anything, I said, first offense, you pay a big fine for these employers that get caught with illegal workers. And the second one is you lose your business. And I know that can't be the solution because it's more complex than that. But there has to be some teeth to what happens, because just paying a little fine and knowing that those workers are going to be back at some point isn't. So Edgar, again to you, tell me a little bit about workplace fairness and what's the number one public policy or policy issue that something that could make a change for the better.
So workplace fairness provides free legal resources to the public by cultivating and maintaining over 400 pages of Know Your Rights content that covers all 50 states' employment laws. So essentially, you can think of us as a Wikipedia of employment law. If you're having an issue at work and you're not sure what your rights are, or you want to get an idea of what rights you should enforce, you can come to our site for information regarding various employment laws at the federal level and at your particular state. And also we try to be an advocate for workers by supporting different organizations in their work, and also the initiatives that are being put out there that are in support of workers. And the one thing that I would say, to your question, Brady, about a major piece of policy that would help this issue that we've been talking about today, is, I want to make sure that we don't lose sight of the fact that, particularly talking about migrant workers in general, when they come here, they have to work. They, and then they're not coming here just because they want to, in many cases, right? Then when you're talking about migration from south of the border. And so, I do believe with Kevin that you have to have strict policies around employing child laborers, particularly in certain industries, right? But I think one thing for me is attacking the peonage that's happening, with a lot of migrant youth that are coming here and being forced to work when they don't really want to, particularly in certain industries. And I mentioned before about when a lot of minors come, they were tricked into coming here because of promises of everything being paid for and being taken care of, or being put in situations where they have no choice but to work. And I think if we can find a way to address that, even if it's creating more apprenticeship programs where people get exposure to certain things, but not working a full shift or being required to work, heavy machinery. I think those things might be more beneficial to, meet the need to protect minors, but also give them an ability to earn some money, so that they can, send it hopefully back to their families, not paying it to someone that's taking advantage of them.
All right, gentlemen. This has been a wonderful discussion, and I really appreciate your comments. We will close now and just say thank you for attending today's podcast episode. And if you have any questions, make sure that you see down below in the information is going to be both websites and contact information for these two gentlemen. With that, I would say thank you and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you all.